I still remember the exact shade of dusk settling over my grandparents' backyard that afternoon, an auburn glow that blanketed the hedges and cast long, playful shadows across the grass. It was the kind of evening you'd find in old family photo albums. The smell of charred burgers drifting on the breeze, laughter echoing off the wooden fence, and cicadas droning their summer hymn. But this year, the reunion held something unexpected for me: the jeers of my own blood. My name is Celeste Monterey, and I've always been a little different from the rest of my cousins. Growing up, I was the one who tinkered with broken gadgets in my bedroom, taught myself basic coding on a hand-me-down laptop, and found solace in the hum of electronics, while everyone else played backyard baseball. But saving every penny to keep my little flip phone in pristine condition, yes, a flip phone, wasn't just a quirk, it was a necessity. After Dad's layoffs and Mom's extended hours at the diner, that flip phone represented both my frugality and my fierce independence. So when I arrived at the reunion's shabby chic picnic tables, my relic of a phone snug against my hip, I felt proud, until my cousin Amber spotted me. With her perfectly styled bob and succulent-hued manicure, she swooped in, hair glinting in the soft light. "Seriously, Cece?" She laughed, flicking her manicured nail at the clamshell device. "Is that from the Stone Age? What, no touchscreen?" Heads turned. A ripple of snickers passed through the group. My cousin Marcus, dude of the group project in high school, whispered something to Amber. Josie, the influencer cousin, held up her mirrorless digital camera like a scepter. I forced a smile, voice steady, though my heart ricocheted in my chest. "It works fine," I said, flipping it open with the same fluid motion I'd practiced 1,000 times. "Calls, texts, battery lasts 5 days. "Oh, honey," Josie chimed, perfectly arching her brows as she snapped a selfie. "You're in the wrong century. Look around. Everyone's on the latest models." She held up her phone, edge-to-edge glass, custom sticker peel, 2 lens cameras. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. In that moment, I could either retreat back into my shell or stand my ground. As the eldest grandchild, I was supposed to be a role model. I squared my shoulders. Maybe I don't need all that. Quality over flash, right? Their laughter swelled, merciless, echoing. Comments flew. "Bet you can't even scroll TikTok. Is your phone from your kindergarten days? Check your privilege, girl." Each quip was a brick in a wall of ridicule. I kept my composure, just barely, until my younger cousin, Little Finn, age 8, looked at me with wide eyes. "Why don't you have a real phone, Cece?" His voice trembled with genuine confusion. I hated that I couldn't muster a warm answer. "Because," I said, throat tight, "this one works." The laughter died down, partly because my voice cracked, and partly because the moment stung too close to home. Under that peculiar silence, I caught my grandmother's eye. She was stirring the big pot of stew, expression unreadable. But I saw her nod, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, like the passing of a torch. I spent the next hour dodging jokes and forced conversations. When I tried to help set the table, Amber elbowed me, whispering, "Go play with the relic." She meant my phone. My cheeks flamed. I retreated to the hedgerow by the old oak tree, cradling my flip phone like a prized heirloom. It was there. I did what I always did when life got too loud. I began to plan. I remembered the old warehouse I'd rented for my freelance repair gigs, the boxes of track phones gathering dust in the back corner, devices I'd restored and sold to local shelters. Track phones. Low cost, sturdy, no frills. Phones that called and texted, perfect for people who needed reliable communication without the bells and whistles. A thought sparked. If they thought my phone was outdated, they were right. But so were their assumptions about value. Maybe they needed a taste of life on the other side of the spectrum. And then I smiled, because I knew what I'd do. As dusk deepened, I rejoined the group for the family toast. Glasses of sparkling cider clinked, toasts were uttered, and someone passed around bowls of Grandma's famous potato salad. I sipped slowly, savoring the tang, eyes on my cousins as they chatted about travel plans and luxury phone upgrades. When the stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of silver against velvet sky, I excused myself. No one noticed my departure. Their attention was elsewhere. I slipped into the garage where my dad kept the old Suburban and loaded the back seat with two things: a stack of fully charged track phones in their factory cases, and a single cardboard box containing the latest flagship smartphones, sealed, pristine, ready for donation. I drove back under the hush of night, the cool metal of the track phones in my hands. By morning, the plan would be in motion. They'd wake up to a surprise, one they'd never see coming. And then I paused, watching the dashboard clock tick to 11:57 p.m., 3 minutes until midnight. What happens next would redefine more than just their phone choices. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The first rays of dawn hadn't yet broken when I parked the old Suburban in my cramped warehouse unit, its rust-flecked door rattling open to swallow my secret cargo. Inside, the air smelled of solder, old cardboard, and the faint sweetness of motor oil drifting from the auto repair shop next door. I liked this place. Concrete floor, metal shelves stacked with forgotten gadgets, a battered workbench scarred with burns and scratches, proof that everything here had a story, just like me. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like armor. My flip phone, the same one my cousins had mocked, sat open on the bench. Its glow was soft and familiar, illuminating my scribbled inventory list. I ran my finger down the names. The shelters, the transitional housing programs, the halfway homes that would soon receive brand new, top-of-the-line smartphones. My heart thumped with a quiet thrill. When I'd first started repairing old phones as a teen, I did it for pocket money. But when my family struggled to keep our lights on, it became survival. I learned how to swap batteries, solder connections, replace cracked screens with surgical precision. Over time, my side gig grew into something more. A network of people who trusted me, who paid in cash when they could, and in gratitude when they couldn't. Last year, after a long night at my workbench, I'd scrolled through my old text messages, heartbreaks, unreturned calls from recruiters, and a handful of thank yous from folks whose only connection to the world was a phone I'd restored. That's when I'd made a promise to myself. When I could, I'd give back. I'd give what I never had: security, connection, a chance. I hoisted the box of brand new flagship phones onto the bench. They gleamed under the single overhead bulb, the factory seals intact, the chargers coiled neatly beside them. Each one was tagged with the name of the shelter or family who would get it. In contrast, the stack of track phones sat humbly by the door, like foot soldiers waiting to be deployed. I turned on some music, lo-fi beats, soft and repetitive. They helped me think as I moved with purpose. I typed up a note for each of my cousins, slipping them into small envelopes. The words came easily. Here's a taste of what you thought was so funny. May your new relic remind you what it feels like to have just enough. Celeste. By the time the sun began to rise, the track phones were lined up in canvas gift bags, each one tagged with a name in looping script: Amber, Marcus, Josie, Finn. Even the aunts and uncles who'd laughed along got one. I wasn't cruel. Every phone was brand new, fully activated with a prepaid plan for a month. But that was it. No upgrades, no endless streaming, no shiny add-ons. Just the basics. Just enough. In the far corner, my father's old toolbox caught my eye. It had once held everything from socket wrenches to the spare car keys I'd secretly used to get my learner's permit. I grabbed it, wiped off the dust, and nestled the flagship phones inside. The contrast made me smile, a battered box holding the future for people who needed it far more than my spoiled cousins did. I locked up the warehouse just as the morning birds began their chatter, their chorus blending with the hum of distant traffic. The city was waking up, and so was I. By late afternoon, I was back at Grandma's house. The reunion weekend was supposed to stretch out for 2 more days, but I could already sense the fragile fabric of our togetherness fraying at the edges. Inside the kitchen, the smell of roast chicken and herb stuffing made my stomach growl. Grandma stood at the counter, her back curved, peeling potatoes like it was a form of meditation. "Gran?" I said softly, slipping the first of the gift bags onto the table. Do you think they'll hate me for this?" She didn't look up, just kept peeling. Cece, people don't hate you for telling them the truth. They hate the truth for reminding them who they are. I swallowed the lump in my throat, her words soaking into the rawest parts of me. Thanks, Gran. She paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. Your mama would be proud, you know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You didn't grow up greedy, Celeste. You grew up seeing people for what they needed. I wanted to hug her, to hold on tight and bury my face in her shoulder like I had when I was 5. But there was work to do. I squeezed her arm instead and stepped back outside. Under the old oak tree, I laid out the canvas bags like offerings. My cousins were scattered across the backyard, oblivious. Josie was live streaming her picnic plate to her followers. Marcus tossed a football with his dad. Amber checked her reflection in the garden window every 5 minutes. I waited until dusk again. Funny how the day seemed to bookend my boldest moments. When the sky turned a bruised purple, I called them all together, clinking my glass like it was a wedding toast. Hey everyone, I began, my voice steady but my palms sweating behind my back. I have something for you all. They circled in, curiosity mixing with the same smugness I'd seen the day before. I handed out the bags, one by one, watching their expressions flicker from confusion to annoyance to disbelief. What's this? Amber scoffed, pulling out the small, brick-shaped phone like it was a dead rat. A phone, I said simply, my smile tight. Thought you'd appreciate something classic. No more, no less. Marcus turned his over in his hands, poking at the plastic keypad. Is this a joke, Celeste? Josie's jaw dropped when she realized there was no selfie camera, just a basic screen, numbers, and the dial tone when she flipped it open. Are you serious right now? She hissed, eyes darting around, as if I'd just humiliated her on live TV. I let their outrage wash over me like a cold rain. Sometimes you need to remember what enough feels like, I said. You laughed at me for having less, so now you'll get to live it. A silence settled between us. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but I didn't flinch. Then I added, by the way, those new phones you wanted so badly? I donated them, to shelters, families who really need them. Amber's mouth fell open. Marcus swore under his breath. Josie looked like she'd just bitten into something sour. But behind them, Grandma stood in the doorway, a quiet sentinel, her eyes glittering with something like pride. Enjoy your evening, I said, my voice low, and your new phones. As I turned away, my old flip phone buzzed in my pocket. One new message, from the director of the city shelter. They'd received the flagship phones that morning. Families were already lining up to get connected. I looked back at my cousins, their stunned faces framed by the soft glow of fairy lights strung across the backyard. They'd mock me, hate me, maybe even cut me off for good. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Then, just as I reached the gate, a hand grabbed my arm. It was Josie, her eyes burning with something I couldn't quite read. Anger, fear, maybe a hint of shame. You think you're better than us now? She whispered. I met her gaze, my voice calm and certain. No, Josie, I think you can be better than you were yesterday. The question is, will you? Before she could answer, my flip phone buzzed again. Another message. Another thank you. I slipped through the gate into the night, my heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The real storm hadn't even begun. Continue to next part. The night after I gave my cousins those track phones, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom at Grandma's house, staring up at the old glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 10. The past and present seemed to collide right there in that small room. My flip phone on the nightstand, buzzing now and then with updates from the shelters, while my cousins' muffled arguments drifted through the thin walls. I could hear Amber's sharp tone first. Who does she think she is? Embarrassing us like that. Then Marcus, trying to sound calm but failing. It's a phone. We'll just buy new ones. Josie, her voice quieter, carried a tremor. It's not just the phone, Marcus. She made us look stupid, in front of everyone. A part of me wanted to press my ear to the wall, hungry for more. Another part, deeper, more tired, felt the weight of it all settling in my bones. I knew they wouldn't understand overnight. Maybe they never would, but I hadn't done this for them to applaud me. I'd done it for the shelters, for the families who would feel just a little safer, knowing they could call for help, could look for work, could stay connected. I rolled over, facing the window. The moon was a pale coin in a navy sky. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train wailed, a sound that always made me feel both small and strong, like the world was bigger than any of my problems. I closed my eyes, the hum of my flip phone steady by my side. By morning, the fallout had begun. I came down the stairs to find Amber at the kitchen table, hunched over her new track phone like it was a dead animal she'd found on the road. She looked up at me, eyes puffy, lips pressed into a tight line. "Nice stunt," she said. "You really think you're some kind of hero?" I shrugged. "It wasn't about me," she scoffed. "Right, you could have just asked Mom and Dad for money instead of making us look cheap." "It's not about money either." I dropped into the chair across from her, resting my chin in my hands. "It's about remembering what enough feels like." She snorted. "Spare me the lecture." I let her storm off. I wasn't here to change Amber overnight. She'd either learn or she wouldn't. That was her choice now. The rest of the day blurred into a haze of awkward silences, sidelong glances, and whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. I busied myself helping Grandma in the garden, pulling weeds, trimming rose bushes, hauling fresh vegetables to the kitchen. Each task grounded me, reminded me that life was made of these small, honest things: hands in the dirt, sweat on my brow, the simple satisfaction of doing work that mattered. By dusk, I was ready to leave. Grandma walked me out to the Suburban, her steps slow but steady. She pressed a small tin into my hands, homemade cookies wrapped in wax paper. "Drive safe, Cece," she said, patting my cheek. "Don't let their bitterness stick to you." "I won't," I promised. "Thank you for seeing me." She just smiled. "You've always been easy to see." I climbed into the driver's seat, the Suburban's engine coughing awake like an old dog. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of my cousins through the living room window. 3 silhouettes clustered around their cheap new phones, faces lit by the pale glow of disappointment and stubborn pride. I drove into the night, the city lights bleeding into the horizon. My flip phone buzzed again, a message from a shelter director I'd worked with for years. *Celeste, thank you. The phones are already changing lives. We gave the first one to a single mom with 2 kids. She cried when she heard she could finally look for work without begging for Wi-Fi. I pulled over on a quiet side street, tears blurring my vision. I pressed the phone to my chest and let the sobs come, big, shaking breaths that left me hollow and somehow whole. This was why I did it. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but for that single mom. For every kid who needed a way to call home. For every version of myself who'd once felt so alone. When I finally pulled myself together, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, my cheeks blotchy, but I didn't care. I looked real. Honest. Enough. As I turned the key and drove on, I had no idea that my cousins weren't done with me yet. It started with the messages. First, one from Amber. *, we need to talk, call me. Then Marcus. *, hey, this is going too far, pick up. And finally, Josie. *, please, can we meet? I didn't answer right away. I spent the next day in my warehouse, repairing cracked screens for a batch of old tablets I'd promised to donate to a community center. I let the messages pile up, my flip phone vibrating across the workbench like a restless insect. By sunset, I caved. I agreed to meet them at the old diner we'd grown up visiting with our parents. A tiny place with chipped linoleum floors and a jukebox that hadn't worked in a decade. When I walked in, they were all waiting, crowded into a booth that looked too small for their big personalities. Amber looked defensive, arms crossed. Marcus was stone-faced. Josie, surprisingly, looked almost guilty. I slid in across from them, the vinyl seat squeaking under my weight. "So, you wanted to talk." Marcus spoke first. "Look, Celeste, this is ridiculous. You made your point. Now give us the new phones back." I tilted my head. "No." Amber's eyes narrowed. "You can't do that." Actually, I said, folding my hands on the table, I can. They were mine. Now they're gone to people who need them more. Josie leaned forward, her voice low and pleading. Celeste, I get it. We were cruel. But you can't just… What? Remind you that not everyone gets to live the way you do, I asked, my tone sharper than I meant. I'm not sorry. Amber slammed her palm on the table, rattling the sugar caddy. You're such a martyr, always acting like you're better than us. No, I said, my voice suddenly calm. I'm not better. I just know what it's like to have nothing, and I'm not afraid to live with enough. The silence that followed was heavy, thick as syrup. We sat there, 4 cousins divided by an invisible line that I knew none of us would cross tonight. Finally, Josie exhaled, her shoulders sagging. So that's it, you're just cutting us off? No, I said, my throat tight. I'm giving you a chance. You can keep the track phones, learn what it means to make do, or you can buy yourselves new ones. But you'll remember this every time you swipe your screen. Amber scoffed. We'll just buy new ones tomorrow. I nodded. Maybe you will, but you'll never forget that someone else needed them more. I stood, slipping out of the booth. For a moment I let myself look at each of them, not with anger, but with something closer to hope. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I was done carrying the weight for them. I left the diner as the neon sign flickered overhead, my old flip phone buzzing in my pocket with another message from the shelter. The world spun on, messy, imperfect, and beautifully, brutally honest. And I was ready for whatever came next. Continue to next part. I wish I could say walking out of that diner felt like freedom. That I left the red vinyl booths and the flickering neon sign behind with my head high and my heart lighter. But the truth is, as soon as I pushed through the squeaky glass door into the parking lot's harsh yellow lights, I felt the hollow echo of something heavy that wouldn't leave me alone. My flip phone buzzed in my jacket pocket like an anxious heartbeat. I ignored it for a moment, leaning against the Suburban's hood, the metal still warm from the day's sun. I could see my reflection in the windshield, a single figure in a pool of cracked asphalt, dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, eyes that looked older than 26. Part of me wanted to go back in there, to yell at them again, to demand they understand. But another part knew the real work didn't happen inside that diner. It happened out here, in the quiet, in the follow-through. When I finally flipped open the phone, the screen glowed with new messages. Not from my cousins. No surprise there. These were from people who'd been on the other side of the donation line. The shelter director, a caseworker I'd helped before, a teacher from an underfunded school who'd just handed a phone to a kid who'd never had one. Asterisk, you changed her whole life. Asterisk, he can call his grandma now when he feels scared. Asterisk, thank you, Celeste. The messages blurred until the screen fogged with my breath. I let out a shaky exhale and pressed the phone to my chest. It didn't fix everything. But it fixed something. And sometimes, something was enough. I drove home in silence. No music, just the hum of the tires and the occasional whoosh of cars passing on the interstate. The city skyline flickered in the distance, all glass and steel, so different from Grandma's sagging front porch and the backyard where we'd all once played hide-and-seek. When I finally turned onto my block, I felt it, a prickle at the base of my neck. My warehouse lights were on. I killed the engine and sat in the dark cab, staring at the cracked roll-up door. No one was supposed to be here. I'd changed the locks twice in the last year, ever since some old client had gotten the wrong idea about what I kept inside. I slid out of the truck, keys clenched in my fist like a makeshift weapon. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. When I reached the entrance, I could hear voices, 2, maybe 3, low and muffled by the thin metal walls. I forced my breath to steady, then slowly pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. And there they were, Marcus, Amber, and Josie. Standing in the middle of my sacred clutter, my battered workbench, the stacks of plastic bins filled with spare screens and motherboards, the soldering iron still cooling on its cradle. Amber spotted me first. Finally, she hissed, arms crossed over her chest. We need to talk. You broke into my shop? I asked, voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Are you kidding me? Marcus lifted his chin. We didn't break in, the door was unlocked. It's locked for a reason, I shot back. What do you want? More phones? More pity? Josie held up her hands. Celeste, please, just listen. I glanced at her. Unlike the other two, her eyes weren't cold. They were heavy, like she'd been carrying something too big for too long. Fine, I said, stepping deeper into the room. You have 5 minutes. Amber's jaw clenched. We want you to take it back. The phones, the donations. No, Josie interrupted. That's not what we want. Marcus turned on her. Speak for yourself, Josie, she embarrassed us. We look like a charity case now. That's not Celeste's fault, Josie snapped. It's ours. Silence, heavy, electric. Even Amber looked thrown by that. Josie stepped closer to me. I wanted to say thank you. I blinked. Excuse me? Look, she said, voice trembling. You were right. I don't know what it's like to have to count every penny. To use the same phone for 10 years. To fix what's broken instead of throwing it away. You embarrassed me because you were right. Amber scoffed, rolling her eyes. Marcus looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. So now what? I asked. You came all the way here to say that? Josie shook her head. No, I want to help. I let out a harsh laugh. Help? You? The girl who spends more on lip filler than I make in a month? I deserve that, she said, her voice steady. But I mean it. Let me help. I stared at her, really stared. Josie, who'd mocked my flip phone, who'd called me out on a live stream for being out of touch, she looked different tonight. Smaller. Or maybe just real. And them? I asked, jerking my chin at Marcus and Amber. Amber crossed her arms tighter. We're not here to grovel, Celeste. You made your point. Yeah, Marcus added. We just want this over with. Josie turned to them, her voice suddenly sharp. You don't get it. This isn't just about us anymore, it's about what she's doing. She looked back at me. Let me donate too, let me be part of it. Part of me wanted to say no. To tell her this was my fight. My mission. But the other part, the part that had handed out phones to kids who'd never had one, knew the truth. One person could start the fire, but it took many to keep it burning. One condition, I said, my voice even. You don't do this for likes. No posts, no brand deals, no I'm so charitable reels. You do it because you want to. Josie nodded without hesitation. Deal. Marcus scoffed. You're both crazy. Amber shook her head. Let's just go. They left in a huff, slamming the warehouse door behind them. For a second, the metal rattled, echoing off the concrete walls. Then silence. Josie looked at me, her expression almost hopeful. So, where do we start? I picked up a cracked tablet from the bench and handed it to her. You start by fixing this. She laughed. Soft, unsure, but real. You're serious. Dead serious, I said. Welcome to enough. She rolled up her sleeves, eyes scanning the chaos of my tiny empire. Show me how. I did. As the night bled into dawn, the two of us sat side by side at the workbench. Screws scattered like confetti, the soldering iron hissing softly, the smell of burnt plastic filling the room. Josie listened. She asked questions. She got frustrated when the tablet's back panel wouldn't snap into place. And every time she cursed under her breath, I saw it. The spark that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of change. Outside, the city woke up. The first bus rumbled past, its brakes squealing. I glanced at my flip phone. A new message blinked on the screen, from a mom at the shelter I'd helped last month. Her kids had just started their first day at school with a working tablet. I smiled, looked at Josie, her hands smudged with grease, her hair pulled back in a sloppy bun. This was just the beginning. And deep down, I knew the reunion wasn't over, not by a long shot. Continue to next part. Josie didn't last 10 minutes before she nicked her finger on the screwdriver. We were still in my warehouse, the early dawn creeping through the grimy windows, painting the scattered piles of parts in soft gold. The city outside was waking up. Car horns, the distant rumble of a garbage truck, the chatter of morning birds perched on the power lines. But inside it was just us. Me, hunched over my battered workbench, and Josie, her glossy manicure chipped at the edges already. "Hold it steady," I said, reaching over to guide her hand. The tablet's back cover lay pried open like a clamshell, the delicate insides exposed. "If you slip, you'll crack the battery housing." Josie huffed out a breath, blowing a strand of hair out of her eyes. "How do you do this every day? It's like performing surgery with dollar store tweezers." I smirked. Patience, and a steady hand. She looked at me, eyes narrowed. "Do you ever get tired of it?" The question hung in the dusty air. I flexed my fingers, feeling the faint ache in my knuckles from a decade of repairs. "Sometimes. But then I remember who's waiting for this to work again, and then I don't." Josie's shoulders dropped. She focused again, tongue peeking out in concentration as she carefully nudged the battery connector into place. I watched her work. Saw the tiny tremble of her fingers, the way she bit her lip when the plastic clip refused to snap. It wasn't just the tablet she was fixing, it was something in her too. An hour later, she leaned back with a triumphant sigh. "Done!" I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, a soft glow that made her grin split wide. For a moment, she looked like the kid I remembered, a girl who used to braid my hair at sleepovers, who once covered for me when I snuck out to work a night shift at the 24-hour copy shop. "Nice work," I said. Josie's smile faltered. "Does this mean you'll let me help with the donations?" I nodded. "It's a start." We loaded the newly repaired tablets into a battered cardboard box. Some would go to the shelter's after-school program, a few more to an elderly couple who'd been using a 10-year-old laptop with a broken hinge. Every piece felt like a puzzle, one more thing that would make life a little easier for someone else. As we taped the box shut, Josie wiped her hands on her jeans. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you still use that flip phone?" Her eyes flicked to where it sat on the bench, its plastic casing worn smooth. "I mean, really." I hesitated. "Because it reminds me where I came from, because it does what I need, and because—" I paused, choosing my words. "Because sometimes, the thing that everyone laughs at is the thing that keeps you grounded." Josie nodded, as if she was trying to tattoo my answer onto her heart. "I think I get it now." I didn't say what I was thinking. I hope you do. Later that day, we drove to the shelter together. Josie insisted on riding shotgun, holding the box on her lap like a fragile gift. As we pulled up to the curb, the director, a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, waved us inside. "Celeste, you're a lifesaver," he said, taking the box from Josie's hands. "And who's this?" "Josie," she said quickly, sticking out her hand. "Celeste's cousin. I'm helping now." The director gave her a knowing look. "Well, we can always use more hands." He led us through the cramped front office to a room filled with mismatched chairs and tables. Kids clustered in groups, pencils scratching on worksheets. The faint hum of a teacher's voice drifting from a corner whiteboard. When they saw the tablets, a ripple of excitement spread through the room. One little boy, maybe 8, with a mop of curly hair and wide eyes, tugged at Josie's sleeve. "Is that for me?" Josie glanced at me. I nodded. She knelt down, holding out the tablet like it was made of gold. "Yeah, buddy, this one's yours." His eyes went round. "Really?" "Really," she said, her voice catching. I watched the moment land inside her like a seed. I knew she'd never forget it. As we drove back to the warehouse, Josie didn't say much. She stared out the window, her reflection fractured by streaks of late afternoon sun. Finally, she turned to me. "Celeste, I want to do more." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "A fundraiser, or a drive, something bigger." "With your followers?" She flinched at the edge in my voice. "No posts, remember? I mean real people, friends with money, brands that waste thousands on launch parties. I can get them to give you what you need." I pulled into the warehouse lot, parking under the flickering street lamp. "That's not just help, Josie. That's work." "I know," she said, eyes steady. "But maybe it's time I worked for something that matters." I couldn't argue with that. Inside, we scribbled plans on scraps of cardboard, numbers, names, connections. Josie knew how to pull strings I'd never even seen, and I knew how to turn every dollar into real change. For hours, the warehouse hummed with our low voices and the clatter of keys. When the clock hit midnight, Josie leaned back, rubbing her temples. I should go home. Take one of the spare cots, I said. It's safer. She hesitated, then nodded. Thanks. I lay awake on my own cot, staring at the ceiling beams while my flip phone buzzed again. A photo from the shelter director, that little boy, fast asleep with the tablet clutched in his arms. My throat tightened. This was why. This was everything. Before sleep pulled me under, I whispered into the dark. This is just the beginning. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. I woke up the next morning to the rattle of my warehouse door rolling open, the clang echoing through the cavernous space like a drum beat. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, back in that half-sleep where the hum of the city blended with memories of Grandma's kitchen. But then I heard Josie's voice, low and hushed, drifting through the racks of salvaged electronics. I swung my legs off the cot, feet hitting the cold concrete. The warehouse smelled like solder and old plastic and burnt coffee from the rusted Mr. Coffee that I kept forgetting to replace. When I peeked around the corner, Josie was perched on a stack of old computer towers, cradling her track phone. Yes, the same one she'd once sneered at like it was radioactive. Her nails were chipped, hair pulled up in a messy knot. She looked real. Who are you calling at this hour? I asked, voice still scratchy with sleep. She jumped, nearly dropping the phone. Hey, didn't mean to wake you, it's just, I've been talking to a friend of mine. He works PR for a big company that upgrades their phones every year. They have boxes of barely used models. They shred them for security. I told him that's stupid. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of her words. You want to… what? Get them to donate instead, wipe the data, refurbish the hardware. We can do that here, she gestured at my workbench, the piles of tools and parts. I mean, you can. I can. Learn. I raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Dead serious. Her voice was small but steady. I want to do it right, Celeste. For a heartbeat, I saw the girl she used to be. Not the influencer, not the snide cousin, just Josie, 10 years old, racing me down the gravel driveway at Grandma's house, barefoot and laughing. Okay, I said. Let's do it. By noon, the warehouse looked like a war zone. Cardboard boxes towered like crooked city skylines, half of them open and spilling out used phones, some pristine, some battered beyond recognition. Josie sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting them into piles while I hunched over the workbench, my magnifying lamp making my eyes feel like they belonged to an old woman. Hey, Josie said suddenly, remember that time at the reunion when Marcus made you cry behind the shed? I froze, the screwdriver slipping from my grip. Which time? She winced. I mean, the big one. You were 14, I think. He'd just gotten his first phone, a brand new iPhone. You'd just found that old flip in the trash and fixed it up. He told everyone you were the junkyard girl. I swallowed, the old humiliation bubbling up. Yeah, I remember. Josie's eyes were soft. I didn't do anything I should have. You were a kid, I said, my voice gentle but tired. We all were. She shook her head. I knew better. I was just scared he'd turn on me too. I looked at her, saw the raw honesty there. It didn't erase what happened, but it mattered. Well, I said, gesturing at the mess around us. You're here now. She grinned. Yeah, now I'm the junkyard girl's apprentice. The first batch we processed that afternoon was small, 10 phones, wiped clean and flashed with new firmware. Josie watched every step like her life depended on it, scribbling notes on the back of a torn shipping label. By evening, we'd packed them into bubble mailers, each labeled for a family on our waitlist. How do you keep track of all this? She asked, gesturing at my scribbled spreadsheets. I laughed. Who says I do? She giggled. A real sound, light and surprised. We should get you real software. We? I teased. She threw a crumpled piece of paper at me. Don't push it. When the mail truck pulled away with our first shipment, we sat side by side on the curb, legs stretched into the parking lot's fading sunlight. The hum of the city faded behind the buzz of cicadas, just like Grandma's yard. "So what now?" Josie asked. "Now," I said, "we do it again tomorrow. And the day after that." Her smile turned sly. "What if I get Marcus to help?" I choked on my bottle of water. "Marcus? Are you kidding?" "He owes you," she said, "and he hates feeling like he's the bad guy. If I dangle the chance to redeem himself, he'll bite." "Josie, this isn't just a PR stunt." "I know," she said, "but let's be real. If we want this to grow, we need more hands and more wallets." She had a point, as much as I hated to admit it. "Fine," I said, "but he's your problem." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a weight that felt both new and old. "Deal." The next day, Marcus showed up at the warehouse like he was being forced to attend detention. He hovered by the door, arms crossed, eyes darting around at the chaos. "Seriously?" he said, pointing at a mountain of old Nokias. "You're running a scrapyard?" "It's not a scrapyard," I snapped. "It's a second chance." Josie nudged him. "Stop being a jerk. Grab that box and carry it inside." Marcus muttered under his breath, but obeyed. I watched him struggle with the box, watched the sweat bead on his brow, his designer t-shirt smudged with dust. A part of me wanted to laugh. Another part, the bigger part, just felt tired. By the time we broke for lunch, he'd stopped complaining. I caught him watching me, his mouth twisting like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "What?" I asked, wiping my greasy hands on my overalls. "Nothing," he said. "Just, this is actually kinda cool what you're doing." I raised an eyebrow. "Kinda?" He shrugged, eyes darting away. "Don't push it." Josie snorted from behind a stack of boxes. "You two are exactly the same." "We're nothing alike," Marcus and I said in unison. Then we looked at each other and cracked up. It was awkward and messy, but it was something. That night, we gathered around my battered folding table, cardboard pizza boxes stacked high, the warehouse buzzing with our exhaustion. Marcus scrolled through my ancient flip phone's tiny screen, laughing at the pixelated photos of our first repair batch. "We need a real camera," he said, "and a website, and maybe a name that's not Celeste's phone pile." "It's not called that," I protested. "Might as well be," Josie teased. We tossed ideas back and forth, some terrible, some worse. Finally, Josie looked up, eyes shining. "What about enough?" Marcus tilted his head. "Just enough." "Yeah," she said. "It's what you've always said, Celeste. It's what you gave us. A reminder that, sometimes, enough is more than enough." I felt my throat tighten. "Yeah," I said softly. "That's perfect." As we cleared the table, I caught Josie's eye and nodded toward Marcus. "You think he's really in?" "He's in," she said, "whether he knows it or not." I believed her. I stood there for a moment, watching them bicker over pizza crusts and greasy plates. My cousins, my unlikely team, my beginnings. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of what enough could be. Continue to next part. The first time I saw the name Enough printed in big block letters, it was scrawled on a crumpled piece of packing paper. Josie had torn it from the inside of a shipping box, grabbed a dried-up Sharpie from my workbench, and written the word with shaky, determined strokes. She taped it to the dented metal door of my warehouse, right next to the flickering security light. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, pretending he didn't care. But I saw the way he kept glancing at it like he needed to remind himself it was real. It was real, it was ours. The week after that was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting chaos. The word had spread, mostly thanks to Josie's behind-the-scenes networking. She never broke her promise. No public posts, no glossy reels of us working. But she knew how to make calls, to talk to people who normally ignored donation requests. Marcus did his part too, leveraging his college buddies and old business contacts, framing it like an exclusive club. "You want to help? Prove it. Write a check. Bring your old phones, no excuses." People showed up. They trickled in, sometimes one at a time, sometimes in small clusters, looking awkward and out of place in our drafty warehouse that smelled like burnt solder and stale coffee. They brought boxes of dusty flip phones, cracked iPads, half-working Androids. Some brought snacks, or tools, or offers to stay and help for an hour. It was never enough, and somehow more than we'd ever had. On our 5th night working non-stop, I found Marcus and Josie passed out on the floor, using a pile of packing blankets as a makeshift bed. Josie's arm was flung over Marcus's chest like they were kids again, sharing a blanket fort at Grandma's house. For a moment, I just stood there in the soft pool of light spilling from my workbench lamp, listening to their gentle, exhausted breathing. I wanted to snap a photo, but instead I reached for my flip phone and typed out a note to myself. They're trying, let them stocks. Morning came fast and rough. A truck from a local recycling center showed up at the warehouse door, before the sun even had a chance to warm the street. The driver leaned against the truck cab, coffee steaming in the chill air, looking at our mismatched piles of gear with a raised eyebrow. "You folks really think you can fix all this junk?" he asked. I smiled, not all at once, but one piece at a time. He nodded like he didn't believe me, then helped Marcus and me load half a pallet of broken hardware into the bay. Josie buzzed around behind us, checking her phone for updates. A corporate representative she'd talked to the week before was coming by to tour the place. Some suit from a big tech company who needed to see where his company's surplus phones would be going. I could see the nerves in Josie's shoulders every time she checked her reflection in the darkened window. "Stop fussing," I told her, passing her a chipped mug of warehouse coffee. "You're gonna make him think you're trying to sell him a timeshare." She stuck out her tongue at me but took the coffee anyway. I don't want to screw this up." "You won't," I said, "because it's not about you, or me, it's about them." I nodded to the back corner, where a single mom waited with her daughter for a repaired laptop. The little girl was spinning circles in an old office chair, giggling every time she got dizzy. Josie followed my gaze and let out a breath that deflated all her worry in one long exhale. "Yeah, okay, you're right." When the corporate guy showed up, trim suit, expensive watch, that fake calm they all wore, Josie was ready. She led him through the cluttered aisles of donated tech, the mismatched cots, the hand-lettered sign on the wall. I hung back, letting her talk, letting Marcus back her up with hard numbers and timelines. This was their moment, not mine. After they wrapped up, the suit shook my hand on his way out. "Your cousin's good," he said, glancing at Josie. "Smart, passionate." "She is," I agreed, catching the way Josie pretended not to eavesdrop. He paused at the door. "You know this could be bigger than you think, right?" I tilted my head. "It's not about big, it's about enough." He laughed like he didn't get it, but that was fine. He didn't need to. That night, we sat in the glow of the warehouse's cheap string lights, eating Chinese takeout off the top of a printer box. The enough sign fluttered every time the bay door creaked open, reminding me that this wasn't a dream. It was real. It was ours. "You know," Marcus said around a mouthful of lo mein, "if you'd told me a year ago I'd be spending my nights scraping sticker residue off old phones, I'd have called you insane." "You still can," I teased. He tossed a fortune cookie at me. "Shut up." Josie leaned her head on my shoulder, sighing. "Do you think it'll last?" "What?" "This," she murmured. "The people showing up, the donations, us." I didn't answer right away. I thought about Grandma's backyard, the way they'd all laughed at my flip phone. The way the same hands that mocked me now pieced old parts together like they were building something sacred. "It'll last," I said finally, "because it has to." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing under my pillow. The flip phone's tiny screen glowed in the dark. "Sime unknown number. Celeste Monterey, this is the director at Oakview Family Center. One of your phones helped a runaway teen call home last night. He's safe now. Thank you." My breath caught in my throat. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling beams, the early light painting faint stripes on the concrete floor. One kid, one call. It felt like the universe whispering back, "Keep going." I climbed out of my cot and found Josie and Marcus asleep at the workbench again, slumped over spreadsheets and donation forms. I pulled an old blanket over their shoulders and stood there, the weight of everything we were trying to do pressing into my ribs in the best possible way. They'd mocked me for my phone, they'd mocked me for choosing enough, now they were here, and the whole world felt just a little more possible. And this was just the beginning. Continue to next part. By the time autumn cracked open the sky and made the city breathe crisp, sharp air again, enough had become more than just my stubborn idea scribbled on cardboard. It was real now. Pallets of old phones lined my warehouse walls like a fort we'd built against the cold, each box labeled in Josie's looping handwriting, quote, "Wipe needed, parts only, ready to ship." Marcus installed a whiteboard near my workbench. Every morning, he'd jot down our backlog in messy block letters, then Josie would fuss over it with her color-coded markers. I still preferred my battered flip phone and the dog-eared notebook I kept in my back pocket, but watching them bicker about inventory was better than any spreadsheet I'd ever seen. Our first big fundraiser was a potluck, Josie's idea, of course. Low pressure, she said, no suits, no speeches, just people who care enough to show up. We strung cheap fairy lights across the warehouse rafters and set up folding tables we'd scavenged from the community center's storage closet. Friends and neighbors drifted in, carrying crock-pots and foil pans and too much store-bought pie. Someone dragged in a dusty old radio, and the scratchy hum of old soul music filled the gaps in the chatter. I watched it all from behind my workbench. For years, this place had felt like mine alone. My fortress, my burden, my hiding place when the world pressed too close. Now it was full of people eating stale cookies and balancing paper plates on top of boxes marked Fragile Noël. And instead of suffocating me, it made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in years. Near the back, Marcus argued with a banker in a crisp suit about overhead costs, his hands waving like a preacher's. Josie floated between clusters of guests, refilling coffee mugs and slipping donation slips into people's hands like secrets. And in the far corner, Grandma sat in an old folding chair wrapped in an afghan, watching the swirl of it all with her quiet, knowing eyes. I brought her a slice of apple pie and knelt by her side. "You good?" I asked. She smiled, slow and warm. "Better than good, Cece. This is what you were made for." I ducked my head, embarrassed by the heat rising in my cheeks. "I don't know about that." "You think I didn't see you all those years ago?" She tapped my knee with one gnarled finger. "Fixing your brother's broken RC cars, sneaking your uncle's old cell phones out of the trash. You were always putting things back together. This," she swept her hand to take in the warehouse, the people, the laughter spilling out the big roll-up door. "This is just bigger." I leaned my head on her knee, like I used to when I was little. I let myself stay there for a minute, let her palm smooth my hair the way it always did. For that moment, I felt small and strong all at once. After everyone left, I found Josie in the back office, really just an old storage closet we'd cleared out for a secondhand desk and a busted office chair. She had her phone pressed to her ear, pacing back and forth like she could wear a groove in the concrete. She hung up when she saw me. "Good news," she said, eyes bright. "That representative from ClearTech? They want to sponsor our next drive. We'd get their old company phones every quarter, hundreds of them." I whistled. "That's huge." "Yeah," her smile faltered. "But they want branding, a photo op, a press release." I crossed my arms. "We said no posts." "I know," she said quickly. "But what if we did it on our terms? One press photo, just the donation handoff. No kids, no families, just us, and maybe a line about how people can help." I paced the tiny room, my boots scuffing the floor. I hated the idea of turning this into a PR machine. But I hated turning away families more. And we were already running out of parts for the next batch. "Okay," I said finally, "one photo, our rules, you're the gatekeeper on this." Josie's grin cracked through the worry on her face. "Deal." She threw her arms around me before I could dodge. I stood there, stiff for half a second, then hugged her back. It felt less like forgiveness, and more like an agreement between people who were learning how to do better, day by day. Winter slid in on a sharp wind that rattled the warehouse windows every night. The work didn't slow. If anything, it got busier. Families needed phones to check school closings, to call shelters when the heat cut out, to find work when the bills piled up higher than the snowbanks. I spent hours at my workbench, fingers aching from the cold. Marcus set up a tiny heater under the table that roasted my knees but left my shoulders freezing. Josie tried to teach me how to use her shiny new scheduling app, but I still trusted my notebook more. One night, I was hunched over a stubborn tablet that wouldn't take a charge when I heard a voice behind me. "Need help?" I twisted around. Marcus stood there, sleeves rolled up, hair sticking up in spikes. He looked as tired as I felt. "I don't think your finance degree covers this," I teased. He grinned, grabbing a tiny screwdriver from my tray. "Shut up and scoot over." We worked side by side for hours, the hum of the soldering iron mixing with the wind howling through the metal rafters. At one point, he looked up at me, eyes tired but warm. "You know," he said, "I always thought you were weird for hanging on to that flip phone. Thought you were stuck in the past. But now I get it." I arched an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "It's not about the phone. It's about not forgetting where you came from, about keeping your feet on the ground." I didn't have words for the lump in my throat, so I just nodded and kept working. Sometimes that was enough. By the time the first snow fell heavy enough to muffle the city streets, we'd filled the warehouse to the rafters. Repaired phones waited in neat rows, ready for kids and parents and grandparents who needed them more than anyone at that reunion ever did. One night, after we locked up, I found myself back at Grandma's house. She was asleep in her old armchair, an Afghan pulled up to her chin, the TV humming static. I slipped my flip phone from my pocket and snapped a photo. Grainy, imperfect, but real. Because one day, when enough was bigger than all of us, I wanted to remember that it started with this: a girl with an old phone, a family who laughed, and a stubborn belief that enough is more than enough. Continue to next part. Winter didn't care about our good intentions. It crept into the warehouse through every gap in the corrugated walls, settled into the cracks in the concrete floor, and numbed our fingers as we pried open ancient phones that felt like they'd been frozen shut. Some nights the wind slammed so hard against the roll-up door that the enough sign Josie had taped there flapped like a tattered flag in a storm. But we didn't stop. We couldn't. I started keeping a thermos of cheap coffee within reach at all times, its bitter warmth cutting through the cold that no space heater could chase away. Marcus strung an extension cord from his tiny apartment to power an extra heater when the city threatened to cut our line for a day over a disputed bill. Josie kept her promise with the sponsors. One photo op, no families, just us, and a mountain of donated phones stacked like bricks in a fortress. And still the calls came in. Sometimes it felt endless, requests scribbled on sticky notes, voicemails piling up on my battered flip phone until I had to delete old messages to make room for new ones. "Do you have a phone for my son so he can keep up with his remote classes? Is there a way to get my grandma a tablet for her doctor's appointments? I just need to find work, please. Anything." Each voice pulled me deeper into the work. Even when exhaustion made my vision swim, Josie would make me sit down and eat cheap takeout when she caught me swaying over the soldering iron. Marcus would bark orders at new volunteers with all the charm of a half-baked sergeant. His bark louder than his bite, but it kept the flow moving. We learned that enough wasn't just about the phones, it was about the people who carried them. We made time for stories. A teenager who wanted to find his estranged father. A woman who needed to text her landlord so she wouldn't lose her room. An old man who'd never held a smartphone before, his hands trembling as I showed him how to press the green call button. One night, after an ice storm trapped us inside for hours, Josie curled up on a stack of broken monitors, her breath misting in the air. "Celeste," she said, voice muffled by the sleeve of her hoodie, "do you ever think about how this started?" I did. All the time. "I think about that reunion," I said softly, "how you laughed at my flip phone." She flinched. "I know, I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, surprising even myself. "If you hadn't, maybe I wouldn't have done this. Maybe you wouldn't be here either." She peeked up at me, eyes glassy with sleep and something deeper. "I'd rather be here." Marcus, half awake on an old beanbag chair, mumbled, "Shut up. Some of us are trying to sleep." We laughed, our breath visible in the warehouse air, and for a moment, even the cold felt bearable. In early January, we finally found a rhythm. Marcus drew up a real inventory system. Part spreadsheet, part scribbled post-it map of where things actually lived on the cluttered shelves. Josie set up a weekly drop-off day, coordinating with churches, schools, and anyone who'd listen. And me? I did what I'd always done, one phone at a time. One cracked screen, one battery swap, one life made a little bit easier. It wasn't glamorous. Some days I wanted to throw every broken phone into the river, but then I'd think about the people waiting for our calls back. About the mom who could check her kid's bus schedule. About the runaway who called home. About Grandma's soft voice saying, "This is what you were made for, Cece." I'd keep going, one fix at a time. The big surprise came on a night when the city streets were more ice than asphalt. I was at my workbench, cradling my flip phone against my shoulder as I argued with the supplier about a bulk shipment of batteries. Marcus and Josie burst through the warehouse door, cheeks red from the cold, voices overlapping in a tangle of excitement. "Celeste!" Josie practically shouted. "You won't believe this." Marcus shoved a piece of paper under my nose. An email printout, the company letterhead crisp and official. "Read it," he demanded. I squinted at the words, my brain slow to catch up after hours of solder fumes. When the meaning landed, my knees nearly buckled. "They want to sponsor us," I whispered. "Not just donate old phones, actual funding, a grant." Josie bounced on her heels. "They said we can use it however we want. Repair costs, rent, utilities, anything to keep enough running." Marcus folded his arms, trying to look unimpressed but failing. "They even want to match individual donations up to $50,000. His grin cracked through. "That's insane." I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammering like it was trying to break out. This changes everything." Josie threw her arms around me, squealing into my shoulder. Marcus awkwardly patted my back, then gave up and wrapped an arm around both of us. We stood there, a lopsided hug of cousins who'd once mocked each other across picnic tables, now clinging together like they'd built something sacred from the scraps. When we finally pulled apart, Josie wiped her eyes. "This is just the start, Celeste. You know that, right?" I looked around the warehouse, at the mismatched shelves, the battered workbench, the crooked enough sign still taped to the roll-up door. I saw Grandma's face in my mind, saw that single mom clutching her new phone, saw the kid whose first call home came from one of our dusty flip phones. "Yeah," I said, my voice cracking. "I know." We worked through the night, planning how to stretch every dollar, how to get more volunteers, how to keep the soul of enough from drowning in all the new attention. Because I knew what the world could do when something good got big too fast. I wouldn't let it swallow what mattered most, that this was never about new phones. It was about people, about connection, about the simple truth that enough is sometimes all you really need. And if we could be the ones to give it, then maybe, just maybe, we were exactly who we needed to be. Continue to next part. The morning after the grant news, I didn't sleep. None of us did, really. The warehouse hummed like a live wire. Even at 4 a.m, our shadows stretched long under the bare bulbs we'd strung up along the ceiling beams. Marcus sat cross-legged on a pallet of shipping boxes, tapping numbers into his phone's calculator app. Josie perched beside him, riffling through stacks of paper like a hyperactive crow. Me? I paced between them and my battered workbench, my flip phone buzzing every few minutes with new messages from volunteers, donors, and that corporate representative who kept wanting a quote, 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 quote. I almost laughed every time I read that phrase. Brand alignment. Like Enough was a sleek startup, not a jumble of tables, cracked screens, and people who needed second chances as badly as these old devices did. But I knew we couldn't just drift now. We had the eyes of people who would love to tell the world we failed. And more importantly, we had the trust of people who'd believed in us long before anyone else did. By sunrise, We'd agreed to a plan, our first real one. Marcus would set up a proper accounting system to track every dollar. Josie would run the drive to recruit volunteers who'd stick around longer than a single shift. I would do what I did best: work the bench, keep the repairs moving, and make sure no one forgot why we were here in the first place. At one point, Josie caught me staring at the "enough" sign tacked to the wall, its corners curling under the cold warehouse draft. "You okay?" she asked, voice soft. I shrugged. "Just feels like we're not the same people who taped that up." Marcus looked up from his phone, brow furrowed. "That's the point, Celeste. You don't fight this hard just to stay the same." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Because he was right. The next weeks rolled by in a blur of small miracles and everyday chaos. We brought in a used industrial heater so our hands didn't freeze to the soldering irons. The local high school's robotics club started showing up on Saturdays, swapping their fancy drones for rows of old flip phones. I taught them how to reflow a fried motherboard. They taught me how to keep my temper when someone dropped a whole tray of screws on the floor. Josie put up a simple website, just a single page with our story, a donation link, and a sign-up form. She'd stayed true to her word, no shiny posts showing the faces of people who counted on us. Just enough, in plain black letters across the top. The first time I saw it on my tiny flip phone screen, I felt something settle inside my chest, like, maybe this really could last. Marcus got so good at sweet-talking local businesses that soon the warehouse had boxes of donated food and stacks of gently used winter coats, dropped off by people who wanted to do more than write a check. The line between phone repair hub and community shelter blurred fast, and I didn't mind. When you start helping, you don't get to choose where the need ends. One Friday night, just as the wind started to whip snow against the roll-up door, we heard a quiet knock at the side entrance. I cracked it open to find a woman and her teenage son standing there, both bundled in coats that looked about a decade past warm. She held an envelope in her gloved hand, her eyes darting between me and the glow inside the warehouse. "Are you Celeste?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's me," I said, stepping aside to wave them in. "Come in, it's freezing." They shuffled past the stacks of old phones and the cluttered workbenches. Marcus looked up from the corner, nodding in greeting. Josie appeared at my side, slipping a mug of tea into the woman's shaking hands like she'd done it 1,000 times. The woman pressed the envelope into my palm. "You don't know us, but last month, you gave my sister a phone. She got a job, she found an apartment, she's safe." Her son pulled something out of his backpack, a battered old phone, cracked screen taped together with clear packing tape. "It's all we have," the woman said, her voice small. "Can you fix it? He needs it for school. For when I'm at work." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "Yeah, we can fix it." She pushed the envelope toward me again. "It's not much, but you have to take it." I opened it. 5 crumpled 20s and a handwritten note. "Keep going. Enough is enough." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. Josie squeezed my arm. Marcus pretended not to see. After they left, I stayed up that night at the bench. I replaced the kid's broken screen, swapped in a battery I'd been hoarding for a special case. When I powered it on and saw it boot up clean, a grin spread across my face so wide my cheeks hurt. I looked over at my flip phone, propped up on its stand by the soldering iron. It buzzed, blinking with a new message from Grandma. Just a simple line, "Proud of you, Cece." I pressed the phone to my chest. The metal was cold, but my heart felt warm enough to fight the whole winter back. We kept going, one fix at a time, one life at a time. That was the promise we'd made, and it was the only one that mattered. One night, as we stood in the doorway watching the snow fall heavy and silent, Josie turned to me. "You know what I think?" she asked. "What?" I said, pulling my coat tighter. "I think one day enough won't just be this warehouse. It'll be 100 warehouses, 1,000, everywhere someone needs to feel like they matter." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Dream big, Joe." She shrugged. "Why not?" I looked at the snow swirling around the old streetlight, the warehouse door behind us covered in scratches and tape, and one stubborn sign that refused to fall. "Yeah," I said, "why not?" Continued to next part. By the time February rolled around, the city had turned into a cracked sheet of ice and slush. Our breath still came out in ghosty puffs whenever the warehouse doors squealed open, but inside, the place buzzed warmer than it ever had before. The heater Marcus installed chugged along like an old man's wheeze, but it kept the worst of the chill at bay. It was strange to look around and see how far we'd come since that reunion. Those smug jokes about my flip phone felt like a distant echo now. Some nights I could almost laugh about it. Almost. Because the truth was, every mocking laugh had cracked something open in me that I refused to patch up again. And that crack was what enough was built on. Not some flawless idea, but the broken place inside me that knew how much one connection could mean. The grant money started trickling in mid-February, but we didn't treat it like a miracle. We treated it like a tool. Marcus mapped out every dollar, drawing budget lines on a giant whiteboard he'd dragged in from an abandoned conference room downtown. Josie was relentless about the rules. No press photos that showed faces, no fake grateful recipient reels for sponsors. It was the hill she'd chosen to die on, and somehow our stubbornness only made people trust us more. Our core volunteers started to feel like family. The robotics club kids, the retired electrician who'd lost his wife and found purpose in fixing tiny wires, the single dad who'd learned to solder just so he could stick around after his daughter got a phone here. Some nights the warehouse glowed brighter than any family reunion ever did. It was one of those nights, near the end of February, when the past came crashing through the door. I was hunched over my bench, flip phone buzzing with a dozen voicemails from shelters asking when the next batch would be ready. Josie was curled up on a cot in the back, a box of old batteries as her pillow. Marcus was on the phone with the city office, fighting to get our permit renewed before the spring inspections. Then I heard the squeak of the side door. A familiar laugh, one that sent my ribs straight back to that backyard picnic table where this all began. Amber. She stepped inside like she owned the place, hair pinned up in a messy bun that probably took an hour to style. She looked around at the boxes, the shelves, the people. "Wow," she said, her smile so thin it could cut glass. "So this is it, huh? The famous Enough." I wiped my hands on my rag and crossed my arms. "What do you want, Amber?" Marcus spotted her from across the floor. "Oh, great," he muttered. Josie sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her face tensing the second she recognized her sister. Amber clicked her tongue. "Relax, I'm not here to start a fight. I came to see if you needed any help." Josie snorted. "Help? From you, please?" But I held up my hand. "Why?" I asked. "You made it pretty clear at the reunion how you feel about all this." Amber had the nerve to look hurt. "People can change, Celeste. Maybe I was a little harsh. Maybe I didn't see what you were really doing." Marcus rolled his eyes so hard I thought they'd stick. "What's the angle?" She waved a manicured hand. "No angle. I have connections. My company's been talking about a charity initiative. A real one. None of this penny jar stuff. They'd love a local hero story. We put your brand on the site, you get more donations, more exposure." Josie's laugh was sharp enough to shatter glass. "You want to use enough for your company's tax break." Amber's smile faltered. "It's mutual benefit, Josie. You're all about growth now, right? Think bigger." I took a slow breath, the hum of the soldering iron filling the silence. I looked at Amber, my cousin, my blood, the first one to mock the thing I held dearest. And I saw it. She hadn't come to help. She'd come to scrub herself clean in the shine of what we'd built. "No," I said. Her eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "We don't need your company's pity press. We don't need to be part of your brand. Enough isn't a prop." Marcus let out a bark of laughter, not bothering to hide it. Josie beamed at me like I'd just given her the best gift in the world. Amber's face twisted. "Wow. So much for family. I try to help, and you throw it back in my face." I stepped closer. "Family? You laughed when I brought a flip phone to the reunion. You treated me like trash because I didn't have the shiny thing you did. And now that this is shiny, you want to wear it like jewelry? No. You don't get to." She opened her mouth to spit back something mean, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned my back and picked up the phone I'd been repairing. The conversation was over. Behind me, I heard her heels click against the concrete, the door slamming shut so hard the enough sign fluttered on its tape. Later, when the warehouse was quiet again, Josie curled up beside me at the workbench. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "You could have gotten something out of it." I looked at her, really looked. "So could you. You were the one they used to listen to, the one they thought would be like them." She sighed, tracing her finger through the dust on the table. "Maybe I was, once." "Not anymore," I said. She grinned. "I know." Marcus dropped a blanket over our shoulders as he passed. "Don't get soft now, we've got work to do." He was right. We always would. We went to bed on cots lined up like dominoes along the back wall. The wind rattled the metal siding like it was trying to get in. But inside, the warehouse was warm with something bigger than heat. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my flip phone tucked under my pillow. The same phone they'd mocked, the same phone I'd built my whole life around. My stubborn talisman. Tomorrow the calls would come, the lines would fill, the people would wait. And we'd be here. Enough was ours. Messy, imperfect, but ours. And nothing Amber or her perfect world could offer would ever be worth more than that. Continue to next part. The storm that night was the worst we'd had all winter. Sharp winds lashing at the warehouse walls, sleet pinging off the roll-up door like a handful of thrown nails. But inside, our little kingdom felt unbreakable. Josie, Marcus, and I lay in our mismatched cots, bundled in donated blankets, the humming heater our only defense against the cold. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying Amber's visit in my head, her smile, the hollow pitch in her voice when she called enough mutual benefit. Part of me wanted to believe she could change. But the bigger part knew what I'd seen. The same old games, repackaged in Charity's clothes. I turned onto my side, facing Josie's cot. She was awake too, eyes glinting in the dark. "You think she'll come back?" she whispered. I shrugged under my blanket. "Maybe, but she won't get what she wants." Josie's mouth curved into a tired grin. "Good, she never understood this. Not like you do." And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened. I reached for my flip phone, tucked under my pillow. I clicked it open, just to hear its familiar buzz, its soft glow in the dark. It was more than a phone. It was a reminder that enough had never needed to look shiny to matter. When morning came, the city was blanketed in crusty, half-frozen snow that crunched under the boots of our volunteers as they filed into the warehouse. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old solder, same as always. But now, the hum of conversation rose above the hiss of the heaters. The robotics club kids brought hot chocolate packets and stacked them by the supply shelf. The retired electrician, Walt, shuffled in behind them, a toolbox in each hand. Marcus barked at him to take it easy on his knees. Walt just grinned, ignoring him. That day we cleared 3 whole pallets, phones wiped, tested, sealed, in bubble wrap, ready to go to shelters and families, waiting for the only lifeline they'd have this month. Each time someone carried a box to the loading dock, I felt the pulse in my ribs steady. It was never enough, but somehow it always was. Nali! Josie spent the afternoon in the back office, half buried under sticky notes, and a laptop we'd salvaged from a school district's e-waste pile. She was working on the next sponsorship push, more companies that didn't just want a photo op, but real partnership. She'd learned the right questions to ask. Who does this really help? What's the catch? What stays ours? She came out mid-shift, hair pulled up in a frizzy bun, a triumphant grin on her face. Cleartech's upping their quarterly supply, double the phones. No branding strings attached, and she waved a piece of paper over her head. They're sending us new repair stations, real ones, no more half-broken solder irons. Marcus, elbow deep in a tub of old batteries, whooped so loud one of the volunteers dropped a stack of screens. I just leaned against my bench, laughing. Josie, my cousin, my co-conspirator, beamed at me like she hadn't once mocked the very thing that had brought us here. That night, the 3 of us sat on the cracked concrete floor near the roll-up door, a single strand of fairy lights draped overhead. The heater rattled nearby, the smell of stale pizza boxes mixing with the faint scent of fresh solder. Marcus popped open a cheap bottle of sparkling cider. "Two enough," he said, raising a chipped mug. Josie clinked hers against his. "Two enough." They both looked at me, waiting. I held my mug close, feeling the warmth of it seep into my raw, cold hands. "Two enough," I said, my voice catching, and to never forgetting what enough really means. We drank, our mugs clacking awkwardly. It wasn't the reunion my family would have planned, but for me it was the only one that ever felt real. After Marcus and Josie drifted off to the cots, I stayed behind. I grabbed my flip phone, turned it over in my palm. The plastic was worn smooth from years of use, tiny cracks spidering across the casing like delicate threads. I scrolled through the old messages, the thank yous, the requests, the notes from Grandma telling me she was proud. One stuck out, the single mom who'd written last month, telling me how a phone from Enough had helped her get her daughter into a better school district. I read it 3 times, the words blurring until they burned. Then I tucked the phone back under my pillow and lay down on the cot, listening to the wind rattle the door. Maybe one day we'd outgrow this warehouse. Maybe Enough would spread like a wildfire. More places, more people, more stories stitched together by broken things made new again. But I knew one thing. I'd keep my flip phone, no matter how big Enough got, because it reminded me who I was when everyone else forgot. And it reminded me that sometimes the things they laugh at are the very things that keep you standing when the storm comes. Continued to next part. Spring arrived in timid bursts, patches of melting snow giving way to cracked pavement, slushy puddles reflecting the crooked Enough sign taped above our roll-up door. Inside the warehouse, the smell of stale solder mingled with the fresh promise of something that almost felt like hope. The days grew longer, the light stretching across dusty shelves stacked with phones in every stage of resurrection. The nights, though, stayed the same. Cold cots, whispered plans, the hum of Marcus's spreadsheets, and Josie's half-coherent late-night pitches. And me, at my bench, flip phone buzzing under my palm like a heartbeat that refused to give out. One morning, Josie bounced in carrying a battered manila envelope. She dropped it onto my workbench so hard that a few loose resistors skittered onto the floor. "Mail call," she said, cheeks flushed. "Look at the return address." I squinted at the faded ink, Oakview Family Center. My chest tightened. We'd sent them our biggest batch last month. 20 refurbished tablets, a stack of good-as-new smartphones, all marked for kids trying to keep up with remote classes. I slid out the note inside. The handwriting was careful, looped, and childish. Asterisk, thank you for my phone. I got to talk to my dad for the first time in 2 years. I hope you have enough phones for other kids too. Love, Casey. Beneath the letter was a drawing, a stick figure family holding hands under a crooked rainbow, a single tiny flip phone cradled in the smallest stick figure's hand. Josie leaned her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I nodded. "Yeah." It wasn't the first thank you letter we'd gotten. It wouldn't be the last. But every time I saw one, it felt like the world pressing a warm hand to my ribs, reminding me that Enough was more than boxes of plastic and metal. It was moments like this, a kid holding on to hope because someone thought they deserved it. Marcus doubled our intake days. It nearly killed us all. The lines snaked around the block on Saturdays, folks dropping off old phones and grocery bags, sometimes just one at a time. We'd drag folding tables onto the sidewalk, coffee thermoses steaming as the morning turned into afternoon. One older man came every week with a single cracked phone. Always the same, always one. I finally asked him why. "I fix 'em myself," he said with a shy shrug. "Only know how to do one a week, but that's one more than nothing, right?" I shook his hand so hard he nearly dropped his next donation. We started to outgrow the warehouse. Our shelves bowed under the weight of donated hardware. The break area, if you could call it that, was swallowed by towers of boxes. Josie sat cross-legged on the floor most days, tapping away at her laptop, while Marcus ran daily inventory scans that made my eyes glaze over. One night, when the last volunteer left and the heaters hummed in the corners, Josie spread out a roll of butcher paper on the floor. She drew big, looping arrows connecting our current mess to a dream she barely dared to say out loud. "Satellite locations," she murmured, tracing a circle with her pen. "One here, one near the West End, another by the industrial park, lots of families over there." Marcus lifted an eyebrow. You want to franchise us like a fast food chain? Josie punched his arm. Not franchises, hubs, each one like this. No shiny offices, no suits, just local folks helping their own. I sat beside her, picking at a strip of packing tape on the concrete. You think we can really do it? She looked at me, my cousin, who once called my flip phone pathetic, now leaning over a blueprint for a world where enough meant more than just us. Yeah, she said, I think we have to. We spent the next week calling in every favor we had. Josie's old marketing contacts, Marcus's college buddies, even the robotics club kids' parents. We weren't asking for checks. We were asking for space. Empty lots, unused back rooms, storage closets that could hold stacks of battered phones and mismatched tables. Offers trickled in. Some were too small, too far, too expensive. But one stuck, a retired rec center on the West End. It had sat dark for years, but the old caretaker, a woman named Alma, let us in with a skeleton key that jingled like a wind chime. This place used to have kids in every corner, Alma said, her voice echoing through the cracked basketball court. They deserve that again. I walked through that empty gym, sunlight streaming through dusty windows onto a floor where hundreds of shoes once squeaked and skidded. I imagined rows of folding tables, kids hunched over repairs, families lining up for something that wasn't just a device, but a bridge back to the world. I imagined enough, multiplied. We'll take it, I said. Our first night in the new place, we camped on that basketball floor. Marcus sprawled out on an old foam mat from the yoga room, Josie propped against a wall with a clipboard in her lap. I sat cross-legged at center court, my flip phone open in my palm, its glow the only light in the whole building. Think they'd still laugh? I asked them. Josie squinted at me. Who? All those cousins who mocked this. I tapped my phone. Who said it was a relic? Marcus rolled over and grinned. Probably, but who cares? Josie reached out, flicking the phone's hinge shut. Let 'em laugh. We've got work to do. And so we did, under that creaking old roof, on that scuffed floor where kids once played. We made new plans, new lists, new promises, to keep what mattered small enough to feel big in the ways that counted. And in the dark, when the wind rattled the loose windows, I pressed my flip phone to my chest and whispered to the cracked ceiling. More than enough. Continue to next part. By the time spring settled into real warmth, the West End Rec Center was no longer just a ghost of sneakers and echoes. It was ours. Or maybe it belonged to everyone who wandered in with a cracked screen and a hope they didn't dare say out loud. We patched the roof with leftover tarps. Josie found a retired electrician to rig the ancient wiring so we wouldn't fry every charger we plugged in. Marcus painted a sign that we nailed right above the warped double doors. Enough West End. He spelled West crooked on purpose, or so he claimed. I let him keep the story. Word spread faster than we could handle. Families showed up dragging battered desktop towers on old wagons, kids hugging half-broken tablets to their chests like stuffed animals. Sometimes people came just to sit in the folding chairs and drink bad coffee while they waited for a ride home. Enough wasn't just phones now. It was a promise that they weren't invisible. Not here. I still spent nights back at the original warehouse too, moving between the two spaces like I was holding onto two halves of a single heartbeat. Josie handled most of the community talks, standing in front of neighborhood councils with her sleeves rolled up and her voice low but clear. Marcus ran the money, but not like the old Marcus who bragged about stocks and bonuses. He looked at every dollar like it was a seed, not a trophy. Sometimes I caught them in small moments, arguing over inventory lists, sharing a greasy box of noodles at midnight, laughing until their cheeks hurt. And every time I thought about that reunion, about the picnic table where they'd once left me sitting alone because my phone was too embarrassing to be seen with. Now they carried enough on their backs right alongside me. Some cracks you don't patch, you grow through them instead. One night, in late April, the wind was warm, the rec center's busted windows propped open with paint cans. We sat on the old bleachers, feet dangling above the dusty gym floor. The robotics club kids had left a pile of half-finished repairs on the scorekeeper's table. Someone's half-eaten bag of chips crunched under Marcus's boot when he jumped down to grab another soda. Josie was quiet, her hands folded around a battered clipboard covered in new donor names. She nudged me with her elbow. "You ever wish you'd done this sooner?" I laughed under my breath. What, build a whole operation with my cousins instead of taking that old flip phone to a reunion? She winced, then smiled. "Yeah, that." I leaned back, letting the creaking bleachers hold me up. "If it hadn't happened like that, you wouldn't be here. Neither would Marcus. Maybe none of them would. Sometimes you need people to show you what you'll never be again." She reached over, flicking the hinge on my flip phone where it sat next to me. "You ever gonna get rid of that thing?" "Not a chance," I said, pressing my thumb to the worn plastic. "It's a piece of the first promise I ever kept to myself." We fell into a rhythm that made the days blur. Early mornings lugging boxes between the two hubs, late nights running training sessions for new volunteers. More calls came in than we could answer. Some folks asked for phones, others asked for rides, warm coats, or a place to charge the devices we'd given them. If we couldn't help directly, we found someone who could. It was messy and exhausting and exactly what enough was supposed to be. Amber tried once more. She emailed Josie a sleek PDF proposal that basically boiled down to, "Let me stand next to you for the photo." Josie deleted it without telling me until days later. I didn't even flinch. Some bridges deserve to stay burned. In May, a local paper picked up the story. The reporter was young and wide-eyed, scribbling down everything I said in shorthand, while ignoring Marcus's side rants about scalable budgets. She asked about the phones, the warehouse, the rec center, the waiting lists that kept growing. When she asked me why I'd kept my flip phone all these years, I told her the truth. Because it reminds me what enough feels like. And when you know that, no one can take it away from you. She wrote that down, underlined it twice. 2 weeks later, the article came out. No pictures of the families, just a grainy shot of the three of us under the crooked Enough West End sign, my flip phone peeking out of my pocket like an old secret. Some people scoffed online, called it performative. Some donated. Some asked how they could start the same thing where they lived. It wasn't the flood we feared. It was a ripple, small but real. Grandma showed up at the rec center one afternoon, her shoulders draped in the same patchwork shawl she'd worn every Easter Sunday for as long as I could remember. She sat at a rickety folding table near the entrance, watching people come and go with a quiet, satisfied hum. When I brought her tea, she patted my hand. "You made something they can't laugh away, Cece." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "I didn't make it alone." She tilted her head. "No, but they wouldn't be here if you hadn't carried the first spark by yourself." I sat beside her, feeling the warmth of her words sink into my ribs like sunshine through a cracked window. That night, Marcus found me asleep on a pile of old coats, my flip phone still clutched in my hand. He didn't say anything, just draped a blanket over my shoulders and left the phone where it was. When I cracked my eyes open, I saw the Enough sign through the rec center's broken window, flapping slightly in the breeze. The world outside could change 1,000 times. But as long as I had that phone, that promise, and these people, I knew we'd keep giving enough to anyone brave enough to ask. Continue to next part. The first day of summer felt like it had been waiting its whole life to break free from the cracked sidewalks and battered roofs that had held the city in their cold grip for so long. The sun hung high over the warehouse and the West End Rec Center, pouring through our broken windows like a promise. We'd made it. Enough hadn't just survived the winter. It had grown roots so deep they cracked the concrete. You could feel it in the way people dropped by, without needing to ask what they could give. They just brought what they had. A box of old phones, a tray of half-warm pastries from a bakery that couldn't afford a full ad campaign, but knew how to give in the quiet ways that mattered. That morning, I found Marcus asleep at the warehouse workbench, cheek pressed against a half-finished spreadsheet. I pulled a fleece blanket over his shoulders, careful not to jostle the precarious stack of inventory sheets teetering beside him. Josie was already awake at the rec center, teaching a new batch of volunteers how to pop open a stubborn battery casing without tearing the fragile ribbon cables underneath. She'd gotten good, better than I'd ever admit out loud. Sometimes I'd catch her gently flipping one of the old Nokias in her palm, the same way I used to cradle my flip phone when the world felt too loud. We'd taken a risk expanding so fast. Everyone said so. City officials, well-meaning donors, even Grandma on the nights she came by with a fresh tin of cookies and her eyes full of gentle warning. But here we were, two hubs in two neighborhoods that once pretended they didn't need each other, now bridged by something as small as a working phone and as big as not feeling alone. One afternoon, a line wrapped around the block outside the rec center. A heat wave had shut down the main library's cooling station. We opened our doors wide, let kids come in and play with old tablets while parents took turns napping on folding chairs in the draft from our rattling fans. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But no one outside cared about perfect. Perfect had never been the point. On the hottest day that month, Grandma asked me to walk her home from the rec center. We went slow. The sun glared down on cracked sidewalks, our shadows stretching thin. She leaned on my arm, her other hand curled around her big straw bag, stuffed with knitting yarn and half-finished cookies she'd tried to sneak to every kid waiting for their repaired phone. She stopped in front of the corner store, squinting up at me. "You know," she said, voice calm as a church bell, "I worried you'd forget who you were when this got big." I shifted the bag on my shoulder. "I did too." Her eyes crinkled. "And did you?" I reached into my pocket, pulling out my flip phone. The plastic hinge clicked open, its faint screen flickering in the sun. "Not yet," I said. "And as long as I have this, I won't." She tapped it with her knuckles, approving. "You keep that promise, no matter what." She turned, starting the slow shuffle down the block to her stoop. That night, the three of us, me, Josie, Marcus, sat on the rec center's battered rooftop. We passed a single bottle of cheap lemonade between us, sweat sticking our shirts to our backs. Below us, the city hummed, people laughing on stoops, sirens wailing in the distance, our enough sign glowing faint in the spillover light from the street lamp. Marcus leaned back, arms folded behind his head. "So, 2 hubs in 1 year. Think you can do 3? Josie threw her empty paper cup at him. "Let us breathe, Marcus." He laughed, unbothered. "Just saying, we could." I watched them argue, my hand wrapped around my flip phone in my pocket. I knew what Marcus meant. The seed was there. It had already cracked through the concrete. The question wasn't if we could keep growing. It was if we could keep enough exactly what it had to be, a place where no one was mocked for having less. A place where a working phone wasn't just a gadget, but a bridge to something more. Something enough. I looked at Josie, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes bright with ideas I hadn't heard yet. I looked at Marcus, his big talk masking that same protective core I'd glimpsed when he first lifted a box of donated Nokias like they were gold. 3 hubs, I said. 4, 10, doesn't matter how many if we forget why we built the first one. Josie nudged me with her foot. "We won't forget." "How do you know?" I asked. She flicked the hinge on my flip phone, the old plastic crackling. "Because you'll be the one reminding us." When we finally climbed back down the rusty ladder, Marcus pulled me aside. He looked uncomfortable, like his next words had been coiled inside him for months. "You know," he said, clearing his throat, "I always thought you were weird. For keeping that thing. For fixing junk when you could have just bought new?" I offered. He shrugged. "Yeah." I smiled, just a little. "Still think I'm weird?" He laughed under his breath. "Hell yeah, but," his voice caught, "I get it now, I really do." We didn't hug. We didn't have to. He just clapped my shoulder, hard, and wandered off to give Josie grief about the next intake schedule. The warehouse lights stayed on all night that week. Volunteers came and went. City workers dropped off old modems. A local TV crew asked for a shot of our workbench for a feel-good summer segment. Josie turned them down. No faces. No hungry cameras feeding on other people's need. Instead, I sent the crew away with a handful of flyers and one of our flip phones. "Try living with just this for a week," I told the producer. "Then you'll know what enough means." On the last night before our official summer block party, a thank you to everyone who'd ever dropped off a phone, fixed a wire, or made coffee at 3 in the morning, I lay awake on my cot. My flip phone sat on my chest, the old plastic warm from my palm. Marcus snored 3 cots down. Josie was propped up on one elbow, scribbling new ideas in the margin of a hand-drawn map of possible new hubs. She caught my eye and whispered, "Hey." "Hey," I whispered back. "You still happy?" I thought about it, the cracked windows, the half-broken shelves, the crooked sign, the quiet, fierce truth that enough had always been mine first, and now it was everyone's. "Yeah," I said, "I really am." She nodded, flicking her pen at my flip phone. "Good, then hold on to that thing forever." "Plan to," I said, closing my eyes. Above us, the summer wind pressed against the old metal roof, carrying the echoes of the city and the promise of every voice that would keep calling, asking, hoping, reaching for enough. And in my chest I knew, sometimes enough is all we have. And that makes it more than enough. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.